She looked at me and whispered, "You shouldn't be here, but I'm glad you are. Tell me, if someone said that to you, would you stay, or would you walk away? Comment below where you're watching from, and tell me what this moment feels like to you." I hadn't been back to that town in over 12 years. The road curved the same way it always did, past the fields, past the old gas station that never seemed to change, but everything felt smaller now. Time has a way of shrinking places once filled with youth. Maybe it wasn't the town that changed, maybe it was me. I came back for simple reasons, or so I told myself. A short visit, a quiet weekend, one drink with an old friend I hadn't seen in far too long. But when I pulled into the driveway of that familiar house, he wasn't there. His mother opened the door instead. For a moment, I forgot how to speak. She looked almost the same, maybe a touch older, a little more fragile around the eyes, but the warmth in her expression hadn't faded. Her hair was shorter now, a few silver strands shining against the sunlight. The kind of beauty that doesn't ask to be noticed, but always is. "God, it's been years," she said softly, her voice carrying that same steady calm I remembered from childhood, the one that used to make any bad day feel better. She stepped aside, and I found myself walking through the doorway before realizing I'd moved. The air inside smelled like it always did, tea leaves, polished wood, and a faint trace of something floral, maybe jasmine or lavender. The same clock ticked on the mantel, each sound carrying a piece of memory with it. We talked about small things at first. How her son was working out of town, how quiet the neighborhood had become, how strange it felt to see me, all grown up. I laughed, but inside, something stirred, a soft ache I couldn't name. I remembered how, as a teenager, I used to stop by after school, sharing jokes with her son in the kitchen while she cooked dinner, her laughter floating through the house like music. Now, sitting across from her in that same room, everything felt different. The air was still familiar, but the silence between us wasn't the silence of comfort anymore. It was heavier, aware. Her eyes lingered a second too long when she poured me tea. My fingers brushed hers when I took the cup, and I caught the smallest tremor in her breath. Neither of us said anything. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the room in soft gold. Shadows stretched along the floor, and time felt suspended, as though the world had paused to listen. She smiled finally, that quiet, knowing smile of someone who's lived enough life to understand unspoken things. "You're welcome here anytime," she said. I nodded. But something in her tone, or maybe in her eyes, told me that both of us knew what she really meant. That night, as I left her house, I could still feel the warmth of that room clinging to me. The scent of tea. The echo of her voice. And the unmistakable truth that sometimes, the past doesn't stay where you leave it. I went back the next evening, telling myself it was just to return the book she'd lent me years ago. That was a lie, of course. I simply wanted to see her again. She opened the door before I could knock twice, as if she'd been standing on the other side, waiting. Her smile was polite but softer than yesterday's, a little unsure, a little too welcoming. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "I made tea. Thought you might stop by." Her voice carried that calm warmth that makes you forget how quiet a house can be. The scent of something sweet drifted from the kitchen, honey, maybe cinnamon. Evening light poured through the window, turning everything gold. We talked about nothing important. The garden, the weather, the new cafe downtown. Yet beneath each sentence lived something unspoken, a pulse neither of us dared name. She laughed when I told her the cabinet hinge in the kitchen was still loose after all these years. "Some things never change," she said, handing me a screwdriver. I knelt down to fix it, and she crouched beside me, close enough for me to feel the warmth of her shoulder against mine. For a moment, I could smell the faint trace of her shampoo, clean, familiar, comforting. It's strange how scent can reach deeper than words ever do. "There," I said, tightening the last screw. "You always were good at fixing things." she murmured. When I looked up, her eyes were already on me. Not in the way a mother looks at her son's friend, but as a woman seeing a man she once knew only as a boy. The moment hung between us, suspended and fragile. She looked away first, standing quickly to pour tea. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the cups on the counter. We drank in silence for a while. The ticking clock, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant call of a train filled the space where words might have gone. It wasn't awkward. It was aware. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked finally. "Miss what?" "Being young. Believing you still have all the time in the world." I thought for a moment. "Sometimes," I said. "But then I remember how much I didn't know back then. How many things I didn't notice." She smiled faintly, not looking at me. "And now?" "No," I said quietly. "I notice everything." Her hand froze around the handle of her cup. The room seemed to shrink until it was just the sound of two uneven breaths. When she finally looked up again, there was that same small, wistful smile, the kind people wear when they want to hide something tender. "Thank you for fixing the cabinet," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Any time," I replied. But what I meant was I'd fix anything, just to have another excuse to stay. Outside, night gathered around the house. Inside, a quiet warmth settled between us, not spoken, not touched, but deeply, unmistakably felt. The rain started just after sunset. It wasn't the kind of storm that rushes in with thunder. It came quietly, steady and patient, the way some memories return. The street outside her window glistened under the streetlights, and every few minutes, another drop traced its way down the glass. I'd stopped by to drop off something trivial, a small box of her son's old photographs I'd found in my attic. But the sky opened before I could leave, and she insisted I stay until it passed. So I stayed. She made soup, the kind she used to cook when we were kids. The smell of ginger and garlic filled the kitchen, wrapping around the space like a memory you don't want to disturb. She moved with quiet grace, sleeves rolled up, hair falling loose around her face. Every movement felt intimate, though it wasn't meant to be. We ate together in the small dining room, listening to the rain. The conversation wandered between years, her son's travels, my work, the little fragments of life we'd both gathered since then. But underneath every word, I could hear what neither of us was saying. When she laughed, it was softer now. And when our eyes met across the table, the silence stretched longer than it should have. At one point, she reached for the salt, and her fingers brushed mine. Neither of us pulled away. I noticed the pulse at her wrist, quick, unsteady. I looked up, and her eyes were already there, searching mine as if to find the line we weren't supposed to cross. That's when she whispered it. "You shouldn't be here." It wasn't a scolding. It wasn't even regret. It was a truth said too late, one she couldn't quite believe herself. I set my spoon down slowly. "I know," I said. My voice came out lower than I meant it to, rough with something I didn't have a name for. She looked away, brushing her hands through her hair, trying to breathe. "This isn't right," she murmured, though her body didn't move away from the table. The candle flickered between us, throwing small shadows across her face, the curve of her jaw, the softness around her eyes. The storm outside grew heavier, wind tapping against the windows as if the night itself wanted to listen. I stood, telling myself I should go. But my legs wouldn't move. She stood too, almost at the same time, and suddenly the space between us disappeared, not entirely, but enough to feel her nearness. We both froze there, breathing the same air, hearts slightly out of rhythm. The world outside blurred into rain and darkness. She took a slow breath. "Please," she said, though I couldn't tell if it was a plea for me to stay or to leave. And then, before either of us could speak again, thunder rolled in the distance, a reminder that some lines, once drawn, are meant to be tested, not broken. That night, I left only when the rain softened, but her voice followed me long after I stepped outside, quiet, trembling, and unforgettable. I told myself I wouldn't go back. After that night, after the rain and the silence that followed her whisper, I promised I'd draw a line. A clean one. But lines blur when the heart starts to remember warmth. 2 nights later, I found myself walking again, same street, same house, the faint glow from her window spilling into the wet night air. I told myself I was returning her umbrella. That was the excuse. The truth was heavier. She opened the door before I could knock twice. For a moment neither of us spoke. She looked surprised, but not upset, more like she'd been expecting it, and hating that she had. "You came back," she said softly. "I shouldn't have." She nodded, eyes searching mine. "No, but I'm glad you did." Her voice broke slightly on the last word. That was all it took to undo my resolve. Inside, the house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the faint rustle of rain outside. She wore a light sweater, sleeves pushed up, hair still damp from a shower. She looked comfortable, unguarded. That made it harder. I stood near the doorway, not daring to sit. "I didn't mean to make things awkward," I said. Her lips curved, a half-smile filled with sadness. "You didn't," she said. "That's the problem." The words hung there, honest, fragile, and too real. She turned away, pretending to tidy the counter. "I haven't felt this kind of confusion in a long time," she said finally. "You remind me of something I thought I'd grown past." "What's that?" I asked. She hesitated. "Wanting something I shouldn't." I stepped closer, slowly, careful not to break whatever thin air of control still existed between us. "You're not the only one," I said quietly. The room felt smaller. The rain outside softened into a rhythm that matched the beating in my chest. For a long moment, she just stood there, back turned, hands trembling as she set down a glass. Then she turned toward me, eyes bright, unsure, and filled with something she'd spent years learning to hide. "Maybe you should leave," she whispered. "Maybe," I said. But I didn't move. The distance between us vanished until I could feel her breath, warm, shallow, nervous. She looked up at me, and in her eyes was everything unspoken between us, the ache, the fear, the longing. We didn't touch. We didn't have to. The silence was louder than any confession could have been. And then, mercifully, the clock on the wall struck 9, sharp, mechanical, breaking the moment like glass. She stepped back, eyes glistening. "Good night," she said softly. I nodded, throat tight. "Good night." I left before I could change my mind. But as I walked away, I knew something inside both of us had already crossed over. Not into recklessness, but into truth. And once you reach that truth, you can't ever go back to pretending you don't see it. Sleep never came that night. Not for me, and I doubt for her either. I lay in the small inn at the edge of town, staring at the ceiling fan tracing slow circles above me. The air smelled faintly of rain and old wood. Every time I closed my eyes I saw her face, the way her eyes had searched mine before I walked out the door, the way her voice trembled when she said goodnight. It wasn't what happened that kept me awake. It was what didn't. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The world outside felt washed clean, almost too quiet. I drove back toward her street with a borrowed umbrella still sitting in the passenger seat, the one she'd pressed into my hands the night of the storm. Returning it felt like the only reason I could give myself for going back. When she opened the door, she looked rested, composed, but her eyes gave her away. They carried the same exhaustion I felt, the same sleepless ache that sits just behind a polite smile. "I forgot to give this back," I said, holding up the umbrella. She took it gently, her fingers brushing mine for a second too long. "You could have kept it," she murmured. "It rains a lot here." "I know," I said quietly. "But it didn't feel right." For a moment, neither of us knew what to do with our hands, our words, or the space between us. The morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and hesitant, like it too was unsure if it should stay. "Do you want some coffee?" she asked. I hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." The kitchen smelled of roasted beans and toast. She moved around with careful grace, every motion deliberate, as though we were both afraid of disturbing something fragile that still lingered in the air. We sat across from each other, 2 cups steaming between us, both pretending it was an ordinary morning. She asked about my work, I asked about her garden. The conversation was safe, too safe. But beneath it all was the heavy silence of everything we weren't saying. Finally, she looked down, fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "I'm sorry if I made things complicated." "You didn't," I said. "Things were already complicated. We just stopped pretending they weren't." Her eyes lifted to meet mine then, soft, uncertain, searching for something she couldn't quite ask for. "Sometimes I wonder if we were meant to meet again," she said, "or if life just wanted to remind me what I'm missing." I didn't answer. Some truths don't need sound, they live better in silence. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. The umbrella rested against the wall again, right where it belonged. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For not crossing the line." I smiled faintly. "Some lines aren't meant to be crossed," I said. "But they still change you." Outside, the street glistened in sunlight, puddles catching pieces of the sky. And as I walked away, I realized that sometimes the most powerful nights are the ones where nothing happens, and yet everything does. A few days passed before I saw her again. I tried to keep myself busy, visited old places, met familiar faces, told myself I was just another man passing through. But it didn't help. Every street in that town seemed to lead back to her. Every memory carried her voice somewhere in it. I told myself I'd leave on Sunday. Pack up, drive out, let it all fade into something unnamed but beautiful. But life, or fate, has a way of arranging one last conversation when your heart isn't ready to go. She showed up that afternoon. I was sitting on the porch of the inn, watching the lights stretch long across the road, when her car pulled up. She stepped out slowly, wearing a soft beige sweater, her hair pulled back, no makeup, just the quiet truth of her face. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said. "You're not," I said. But my voice betrayed me. She sat down beside me, leaving a polite distance that felt both too near and too far. For a while, we said nothing. The sound of cicadas filled the silence, that endless summer hum that makes everything feel suspended in time. Then she spoke. "I've been thinking," she said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "About what happened. About what almost did." I waited. She drew a breath. "I told myself it was loneliness. That I just missed having someone around who listened, who noticed. But it's not that." Her voice trembled. "It's you. You make me remember what it feels like to be seen." Her words hung in the air, fragile and bare. I turned to her slowly. "You think that's something we can control?" "No," she said. "And that's what scares me." The sunlight caught the edge of her face, soft gold on her cheek, her eyes glistening. She looked both strong and breakable at once. "I'm not supposed to feel this," she whispered. "Not for someone who once sat in my kitchen as a boy." I looked down at my hands. "And I'm not supposed to want to stay." The honesty between us settled like gravity, heavy, real, irreversible. Finally, I said quietly, "I feel it too. But I don't want to ruin the goodness of what's already here, or make you question the kind of woman you are. You deserve peace, not confusion." She turned toward me then, tears gathering at the edge of her lashes. "You think peace is possible after this?" I smiled faintly, shaking my head. "Maybe not. But maybe honesty is." We sat there a long while, either moving. The air smelled of dry grass and sea wind. The sun dipped lower, setting the world in shades of amber and farewell. When she finally stood, she touched my shoulder gently, the kind of touch that says more than words ever could. "Goodbye," she whispered, though both of us knew it wasn't. As she walked away, I watched her figure fade into the light, the echo of her confession still warm in the space beside me. Some truths don't bind people together. They simply remind them what love sounds like when spoken too late, and too honestly. I left the next evening. The sun was setting low over the horizon, spilling gold across the highway, the kind of light that makes everything look softer, even endings. My bag sat in the passenger seat, beside it the half-empty cup of coffee she'd made for me that morning. It was cold now, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. The road wound along the coastline, and the sea followed me like a quiet witness. The air carried salt and memory, that faint, familiar ache of something once warm now fading into distance. I told myself it was the right choice. That leaving was a kind of love, too. The kind that respects silence, that honors the moment instead of trying to stretch it into something it was never meant to be. But truth has a way of speaking even when the world is quiet. And every few miles I heard her voice again. The way she'd said goodbye the day before, softly, like a word meant to be kept, not spoken. She hadn't cried. Neither had I. But there had been something in her eyes, a calm acceptance hiding behind the heartbreak. The kind that says, "I'll carry this quietly, and so will you." I remember the way she'd stood by the doorway, arms folded loosely, trying to appear composed. "You should go," she said, "before you start thinking you belong here." I smiled, though it hurt. "I already do." She looked down then, a faint laugh escaping her. "That's exactly why you can't." We both knew she was right. When I reached the curve where her house disappeared from view, I slowed the car. For a moment I thought I saw her in the window, or maybe I just wanted to. That soft silhouette framed in amber light, still and beautiful, like a memory caught between seconds. I whispered her name once. Not to call her, just to remember how it sounded when the world was quiet. As the town faded in the rearview mirror, something settled in me. Not peace, exactly. More like understanding. There are loves that live in the open, built on promises, on futures, on all the things people can see. And then there are loves like this one, brief, unspoken, and eternal in their own way. They don't ask for tomorrow. They just ask to be felt, once, deeply, and remembered forever. I kept driving until the ocean turned to shadow and the lights of another town began to glow ahead. But part of me stayed behind, in that house, in that kitchen, in that moment where she whispered, "You shouldn't be here, but I'm glad you are." Maybe we both knew it would end this way. Maybe that's why it felt so real. Some stories aren't meant to last. They're meant to change you, quietly, completely, and then let you go. Love doesn't always need a forever to matter. If you believe that too, tap the like button, and tell me what this story reminded you of. Your story might just inspire the next one.